Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. And
Glad to hear it.
you know what? It's been a while since we've had this sort of talk, and I
Yep.
guess along the way we've had a few new subscribers to your channel and my channel, and really the podcast channel in general. So,
Yep.
might be worth explaining what we're both about, but also we've had a lot of interesting conversations lately. So, why don't
Yeah.
we talk about online debate as well?
Okay. Yeah. Good place to start. Yeah, interesting topic. Refreshing, I guess, for the audience, what it is that we do here on the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast and more generally. Do you want me to, shall I start, 4S?
Oh well, I'm happy to at least start off because I was the one that pitched the name of the podcast. So
Yeah,
I
well, why
guess
don't you go then? Go for it.
well, yeah, I'm happy to let people know that the reason why we called it the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast is that, well, I guess at the time I was getting a lot more involved in politics, and I noticed, at least here in Australia, a lot of the hardcore think tanks that are out there are, the military ones, or at least the more conservative ones like ASPI and all of that, and uh, look, one of them, the official title of think tanks is about policy, but really what it is propaganda, and at least talking points, and at least understanding the policy, or at least the rhetoric or the ideas behind certain viewpoints, certain ideologies. So at least what my thinking was is, well, where's the revolutionary think tank? And,
Yeah.
maybe we should start a revolutionary think tank to think about all of the revolutionary ideas that are out there.
Yeah.
And that was basically the impetus of my pitch to you about this idea, and you thought it was a good idea. I still feel like you think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it is important to have a longer and more in-depth conversation about the revolutionary ideas that we would discuss separately on our own channels, which are still, I guess, long form content. However, this as a podcast it lends itself to even longer discussions and more detail than we would usually go into on our own video essays. So I thought it was crucial, yeah, to unpack in a lot better depth what it is we discuss separately, and like even just discuss amongst ourselves in conversation.
Well, it's like, sure, what I found is this podcast has been like thought therapy, if you will. Like,
Yeah,
if we
yeah,
wanted to like nut out an idea, we've definitely used the podcast to be like, oh, okay, what's the pros and cons of these
yeah,
ideas?
yeah,
Oh, I've been wondering about this. Oh,
yeah,
great, like, let's think this through. But what I found quite a lot is, like with a few comments with my channel, I've quite a few comments with yours as well, that I'd be watching one of your brand new episodes and somebody's been like, oh, I'd love to learn more about this topic. And we, just before you had done the video essay or just afterwards, we would do a breakdown of what
yeah,
would be it. And then I would just say to them, like, hey, why don't you just check out the podcast channel, because we go
yeah,
into this
yeah.
in more detail.
Yeah. And like even people that are very critical as well, like in comments are just like, oh, you need to explain that one better. How did you come to that crazy assumption? Like it's just like, well, we actually have talked about this at length in the podcast. So if you honestly want to check that out, then go and have a look at this and we can explain it a bit better for you. So yes, I think it's good to have that. And like you said before, in kind of your introduction to what the think tank is yeah, it's a vehicle for propaganda. And like, I think, as you've noted, conservatives and right wing uh, people and groups have a lot more think tanks than there exist on the left.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, like, academic circles and the intellectual sphere is, I guess you would say, generally more progressive and therefore maybe tilted to the left. And so the whole of academia potentially is kind of your leftist think tank, if you want to call it that, but like not concentrated in this way. Like you have the like right wing groups and agencies have dedicated think tanks which kind of get together and nut out issues which they can use as part of their propaganda machine. And there is limited, and I'm not going to say there's none, but there is limited revolutionary think tanks out there. There are think tanks or kind of organizations that discuss leftist theory or might discuss revolution kind of as they touch on other topics, but like something devoted more to revolutionary ideas, it's few and far between. And so to have a propaganda vehicle that kind of looks after that very limited uh, resource, which is revolutionary thought, I think it's really important. And like, I just want to make the delineation here or make it clear with the use of the word propaganda. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Like propaganda shouldn't be used in a fashion which is like, which it shouldn't be thought of something that, is deliberately forcing people to think one way or another, and coerces them into doing things against their will. It doesn't have to be used in a negative sense. Propaganda is actually neutral, I like to think, and should be about informing people. In the modern world with life as hectic as it is, be having to, scratch a living and do all the other things that we're, obliged to do. It's hard to be an informed citizen, and sometimes you need propaganda to get quick messages out to the people. Like, a classic example is any of like the cancer council kind of ads that you see out there about, I don't know, wearing a hat, or like being sun smart or something like that, to avoid skin cancer, or like, checking yourself when it comes to smoking cigarettes. Like, that's propaganda.
Well, yes, and to be honest, if it wasn't for those types of ads, that type of propaganda under your definition, an entire generation, the millennials, we wouldn't have had slip, slop, slap, which
Yeah,
really, uh, to lather up with sunscreen, put on your hats. It's that sort of quick messaging
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
means that people do the right thing.
Well, like, yeah, they can make informed decisions without having to read, research paper after research paper on the benefits of protecting yourself from the sun or using a hat and all that sort of stuff, or seeking the shade on a hot day. So like, yeah, propaganda comes, I think, with a lot of baggage in the 21st century, and I
Mm.
think it's been weaponized, the word, on purpose. And everybody thinks of, George Orwell 1984 when they think of propaganda, and Big Brother is watching you and sending you messages to kind of subconsciously get you to conform and, reinforce the status quo or something like that. But like, propaganda doesn't have to be like that. And here at the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast, I think that we can spread revolutionary ideas and touch on them and get some good propaganda out for the revolutionary movement. Because I find in my discussions with people, online, offline, just generally about the idea of revolution, I think it is in everybody's vocabulary. The word revolution, it's sexy.
Yeah.
It's a cool word. But people are ridiculously skeptical of it. like so much so that it is almost just a fantasy. Like, revolutions have happened in the past, but like, it's never going to happen again. So get over it. Like, it's a nice idea and it's cool in a Hollywood movie, but get this idea out of your head that you could ever revolutionize society in the here and now. That is beyond us. And I think it's important
Mm.
then to, have podcasts and discussions like this that break down that mystical element of the idea of revolution.
Well, it's that saying, right? It's the first time's a tragedy, the second time's a farce. I think the word itself is gotten to the point where, well, it's used in a farcical fashion because really at the moment, whenever I've used, whenever I've heard it used, it's been like, oh, it's a brand new technology, it's revolutionary, like
Yeah.
it's like a great idea. It's not like it's not changing the system of how you make tea, or it's not revolutionary in the way I don't know, a new toaster is per se. Like it's not used in the grandiose version, which would have been in, Marx's time or Lenin's time. It's almost, you know, uh, it's your brand new iPhone that's green, not necessarily like, smashing down walls and
Yeah.
fabrics
Yeah.
of society.
Yeah. But like I think that, like, don't get me wrong, the word revolution is versatile and can be used for general groundbreaking change in a technological fashion, or a I don't know, some other fashion that relates to how people interact with each other on a daily basis, or like some type of new trend or something like that, that's taking the world by storm. But what I am talking about here in terms of the word revolution, I think people still have it in their vocabulary as the idea of revolution in what we're talking about in terms of a social economic sense. People still have that attachment to the word revolution. They know what the French Revolution was. They know what the Russian Revolution was. They're fully acquainted with the American War of Independence. So, like, revolutionary struggle is still something that people hold in their mind's eye. They understand this concept. They are aware of it, which is, thank God, like, that is crucial, because that's half the battle. If the word revolution was detached and devoid of all of that type of meaning, then like the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast would have such an uphill battle in front of it. But half the battle is done because people haven't lost or had the idea of revolution detached from it, in terms of a social upheaval and a
Yes.
social revolution. That hasn't been detached from it. But what I am saying is that the barrier is the fact that people think that is unrealistic, unobtainable, and wishful thinking. It's almost
Well,
utopian. And so, like, I think we
mm,
can, in this podcast, what I wanted to get out of this podcast is to help kind of dismantle that fantasy and make it more tangible and realistic for the lay person to be like, no, this is what humans do.
mm,
We are responsible for our own social organization. We're social creatures. We don't get dictated to how we should be doing things, or leave it up to the invisible hand of the market. Like this, the economy is kind of this being that just created itself and will control us forevermore. No, that's
mm,
nonsense. We can control the factors that influence our social reality. That is exactly what it means to be human.
yeah.
And so we should be all fully cognizant of the fact that we can influence our existence in this world in terms of our social relations, and we should want to create social relations that benefit us, not just, whatever social reality we're living with at the moment and just calling it a day. Oh, this is as good as it's ever going to get, so why bother? No, we should be continually checking our social relations and wanting to strive for something new and improved all the time. all the
Well,
time.
yes, because really, at the end of the day, like, just to kind of go back to the point of propaganda, like, I guess you can differentiate between um, what you were kind of suggesting, good propaganda and bad propaganda. Like, really, I guess the envisage of what I see of bad propaganda is, this might be a bit of a Noam Chomsky talking point, but like, the manufacturing consent, the idea of, those headlines from, your Sydney Morning Heralds, the Australian, like the very much mainstream media that say a line of what somebody said or what somebody's supposedly said, and it's deliberately put there um, that you just read the title and you get the flavor of what the article is. And if you actually do read the article, like right at the end of the article, it's like, oh, and actually, it's not this at all. This is actually the true quote. But like, it doesn't matter because that sort of propaganda is just wanting you to get a gist of what it is and the talking points that I guess the journalist wants you to get across and shut down the conversation from there. Whereas a concept like, class consciousness, like, sure, there can be arguments as to how you do class consciousness. Like, obviously, Marx had a certain interpretation, Lenin had a certain interpretation. But the thing is, that is propaganda, and that is at least trying to promote talk, promote discussion, promote a feeling of solidarity, which in essence is supposed to empower, not, sweep under the rug. If you understand where I'm going with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the problem is, though, that I would say, and I think we've discussed this a lot, is that I think it's a term that you use all the time, the Overton window.
Yes.
And like there are certain mainstream media tactics which stop the mainstream media from being really effective in terms of disseminating real information for to have an effective citizenry, right? And which is something that is desperately needed in our democracies today and our modern civilizations. I think the media has a particular responsibility in a democracy to keep citizens informed. Like, you can't be informed on everything that's going on, and the media can't report on everything. But when they do report on issues that they find or think are important, they should be doing that in a balanced way.
Yeah.
And giving as much information that you can kind of take away from that and form your own opinions on, instead of being fed what to think out of articles. That's what good journalism should be doing. And like kind of what you've described in kind of the in the former scenario is
Mm.
like it's more of an opinion piece with, oh, by the way, here's what actually happened right at the end, if you get to the end.
Yeah.
And so like the media is a important vehicle for propaganda. However, as we know and we discuss a lot here, is that because the mainstream media is also caught up in the corporate machine, in the capitalist mode of production, you're not going to get media that is good for media's sake. It's not good for the sake of good news. It is what is getting the most eyeballs
Mm.
on advertising. And so
Yes.
that's how that machine works. And so, like, I think it's important to have think tanks like this, or like good propaganda vehicles, because while there are, still credible and hard-hitting journalists out there in the mainstream media, for the most part, the mainstream media has kind of divulged into nothing more than an advertising orgy.
Mm.
And that really frames what you get out of your daily news. And like more so over the last 20 years, I would say, it's really reached an apex, I would say, more recently within like the last 5 years. But media organizations now are picking sides. Like it's quite clear that like, Fox News, and like, its kind of affiliate or its counterpart in Australia, like Sky News,
Yeah.
like that is unashamedly right wing. Like it's not even trying to give balanced kind of opinion pieces or
Yeah.
balanced journalism anymore. It just appeals to a right wing audience. And so
I'll
the media kind of has moved into silos now. It's not even trying to give balanced journalism. They pick a side because, okay, this is what my audience or this is what our audience
yeah.
wants to hear, and we just feed them that, and then they can push advertising on them that way. Before, the viewer had to kind of get some form of a balance in between being stuffed with advertising, but now it's
Yeah.
just like, well, let's just give them what they want and we'll stuff them with advertising until they're full.
I'll have to fact check this, but I actually was talking to someone recently that it's a bit like Jordan. They're like uh they have like a friend that's doing like a PhD on this kind of thing, and they were saying like obviously I'll have to fast check this, but what they were saying is like your Sky News. So what is the equivalent, I guess, in America to what they would classify as cable news? It's kind of held to a different standard in comparison to the accords and the legislation that it has to follow in comparison to what you would classify as mainstream media. Like it doesn't have to hold what it says it to exactly the same standard. Like I don't know whether this is a Murdoch lobbying thing that he's done, but that's what my friend was basically saying, and I kind of found that fascinating if that's true. But I thought maybe an interesting direction that we could kind of take is okay. So if they want the long form content, they can go to this podcast. But what do we do in our channels? Like,
Hmm.
what does the MysterE channel do?
Hmm.
MysterE.
It's a good question. The MysterE channel is like the tagline that I've got up on it at the moment is it's content for the revolutionary. So I describe myself as a revolutionary. So a revolutionary, let's go back to kind of the basics here, but a revolution is a significant change to the ordering of society. Now, most people, when they think of revolution, they think of kind of, I don't know, a violent takeover,
Hmm.
or a coup d'etat. So, like where you have an armed struggle and an uprising, and one kind of, I don't know, uh, one government gets replaced by a new one. Now, if they're in that scenario, if you just replace one ruler or one group in charge with another, that's not a revolution. That's
Hmm.
just a coup. Now, a revolution is where you actually reconstitute the order of society. And so that's why I know it really catches people off guard, and it strangely meets a lot of resistance from people that are describe themselves as revolutionaries and radical leftists, but like they really find it hard to believe that you could have a non-violent revolution. But I do,
Hmm.
it happens all the time. Every time you see a country like kind of redoing their constitution, that constitutes a revolution because they're restructuring the fundamental, unalienable rights and rules that govern that society. So, like, if you had somewhere in your constitution that everybody has the right to, clean drinking water and decent housing and, uh, decent work as well. Like, and they would be assured that under their constitution that they're able to find fulfilling employment, like that, like adding those things to your constitution if it wasn't there already, that would be a revolutionary act. This is not
Hmm.
talking. I'm not talking about changing laws and legislation that can just be up. overturned by, the next day. Like, constitutional things are foundational elements in the way that your society is run and can't be changed just like that. They
Yeah.
require a lot of political processing and upheaval in order to change them. And so I am on my channel constantly educating people and discussing matters which plague our current societies and our current way of living, and discussing how they can be done better, and how a revolution would be the obvious step to remedy a lot of the problems that we face in society today. And I'm
Hmm.
constantly saying, well, hey, you know, it's not such a bad idea to revolutionize now, is it? Like, and I'm really, driving that one home and making that a sticking point for all of my content. So that's basically what my channel does. And it just does it in more of a succinct and catchy way than what we do here on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think that's pretty succinct. Though uh, I think it's worth also mentioning, how you do that. Like, I think that you can be quite a challenger, and you definitely want to take on, I guess, misinterpretations, or at least your own your own viewpoints into a matter, regardless of whether it's um, against, I guess, a certain ideology. If you make sense, like
Yeah, I
you'll make your own interpretation of things, and
yeah.
sometimes that rubs people the wrong way, whether it's on the left or whether it's on the right.
Right, yeah, yeah. Like, I definitely do that. And like, I've actually been called out on it recently. Like, I said to someone that, like, I do like to challenge opinions, and they were like, "Oh, that's just your bullshit response for when somebody challenges you and you don't have a response for it." Which, it's an interesting interpretation of it. But like, yes, I don't like to just regurgitate a narrative. Like, usually the revolutionaries, in from the 20th century onwards, I would say anyway, revolutionaries are definitely people on the left, and they're radical leftists. They're rarely associated with the right wing and conservatives, almost non-existent really when it comes to conservatives. But yeah, revolutionaries are usually lefties. And so, like, I don't just take leftist propaganda on face value. And like, if I find something that is contradictory on the left, I will point it out or call bullshit on it if necessary. And like, I think people find that antagonistic, like lefties find that very antagonistic. So like, they're more than happy to sit there and clap when I, like, take on some issue that I find with right wing ideology or conservatism. But then if I do the same and question something on the left, and it questions their narrative and their worldview, it like rocks the boat a lot and like pisses a lot of my viewers off. And I've recently, lost a long time supporter of mine. So they called themselves. But like, yeah, they just weren't happy with how I'm constantly questioning things that are held as kind of sacrosanct by the left. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I did a video, probably a couple years ago now, maybe longer, called "ACAB is Nonsense," and I knew that this was going to be sensitive because, like, it's pretty, unquestioned, on in the left, that you would be a supporter of the ACAB movement. ACAB being all cops are bastards. And like, it's pretty much just accepted that, yeah, no, if you're on the left, you are going to support this slogan and
Yeah,
champion the slogan. And like, while I don't actually have any problem with the slogan at all, I think it's funny. I think it's got a lot of strong cultural reasons, especially for an American audience. and for Americans. But like what I challenged was the idea that if you look at the history of revolutionary movements, a lot of them would not have succeeded if the police forces at the time didn't lay down their weapons or refused to take orders. And they did that in solidarity with the working class or just because they, didn't want to follow their orders anymore. But nonetheless, antagonizing the police just for the sake of it would have not allowed any of those revolutionary events to be successful. So at some point, you have to acknowledge the fact that if you're not going to side with them or if they're not going to come over to your side, they at least need to be convinced not to follow their orders. And ACAB does not facilitate that at all. It actually digs a very wide ditch between the whole of the working class and the cops, the physical repression tool of the elites and the upper classes. So like if you're going to help feed the fire and divide working people more and more away from the police, they're not going to be just, not following their orders or dropping their arms to come join the cause in solidarity if they feel like they're hated by everyone anyway. So I made the case that ACAB was counter-revolutionary, and like that seems to be one of the sticking points for this particular person. But like other people as well, like, how could you claim to be a revolutionary and a leftist and attack ACAB? Well, I was critically analyzing it. I wasn't really attacking it, but like, that sort of stuff is controversial. And like, it really shows a lot. Like we're talking about propaganda and stuff like that and grand narratives. And like the left likes to think that they're so like, critically thinking and so much more sophisticated than right-wing people, but like they are just as indoctrinated by their own beliefs as people on the right are. And so it's very hard for them to kind of let go of grand narratives and think for themselves. And like that's what you're referring to. My channel, I don't really hold back on that sort of stuff. Yeah. If I see a grand narrative that I think that is full of contradictions, or can be improved upon or called out for what it is, I'll just do it, whether or not that pisses people off, and it does piss people off.
Well, so just to kind of bookend what you were saying, well, the Russian Revolution wouldn't have happened if they didn't get the army or the police force in line.
There was even the army, like, and the navy and stuff like that. They defected and joined the revolution. The Cossacks, the Cossacks. They let the revolutionaries through at one point, and like they were like the revolutionaries were petrified, like absolutely scared of these Cossacks and like what they were capable of, because they used to just mow people down, and they let them through. They just stopped following their orders at one point. And like you need that. Like this is really delicate balance kind of stuff here. It's like 1 in a million, ace in the hole kind of like odds we're talking about here. And you just have to have all of these things combined to make a revolutionary event happen sometimes. And like the less you piss people off by antagonizing them, the better sometimes, in order to kind of have some class solidarity. And like whether or not people like it, whether they like to hear it, cops aren't, like, while they might represent and take orders from the establishment, they are working class. They are not capitalists just because they follow orders and they're like attack dogs for capitalists or our financial overlords and our ruling classes. They're not of the ruling classes. They're just foot soldiers of the ruling classes. They're still working class people. And so like, if you really are Marxists or if you really are revolutionary, you would understand that you do actually have to have solidarity with all people on the working class. It's truly an international movement, and it is the only division is a class divide.
Well, if you truly believe that they are alienated from their work, then you should believe that they can be convinced to go onto your side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I'm not stupid. Like not all people will be convinced, but and like maybe they won't be convinced at all. But like antagonizing them is not going to stop them from at the crucial moment not following orders or like at least turning a blind eye. I'm not asking for them to become revolutionaries, but like they need to at a crucial moment not get involved. And like the
Hmm.
more you poke the bear, the less that's going to happen. And like that doesn't sit well with people, those types of ideas, because it challenges the narrative. And so like I don't care if it challenges the narrative because this is the thing about being a revolutionary, I find. It doesn't put you nicely in a slot about okay, I'm the left on this issue and I'm the right on this issue.
Hmm.
Being revolutionary requires you to be revolutionary under whatever circumstances are right in order to facilitate a revolutionary occurrence. And
Hmm.
like that is basically playing the game in front of you. So it's not having a set plan and sticking to that. You might actually have to change your game plan on the fly and respond to what's going on in front of you. So you can't just marry yourself to core ideas all of the time. You have to, yeah, you have to be versatile, and people don't like that.
Well, see, that's kind of what I found fascinating about this person. That I had seen comment on a lot of your videos, and yeah, I thought they quite like your content until recently. Uh, it was quite obvious from the thing that the straw that broke the camel's back when they didn't want to listen to your content anymore. It was, at least from my perspective, it seems like you were saying like Marxing talking points, or more specifically historical materialism talking points. Like I don't think you were being contradictory at all, but saying something like, well, profit isn't bad because, historical materialism wise, productive forces wise, like, the reason why capitalism has got to the stage it has been is because of, the coercive laws of competition,
Yeah,
technology, like the profit motive. Like, I don't think you were saying anything profound by saying, well, it's not profit that is bad. It's that it's just the capitalist person that exploits the workers' labor. Like,
yeah,
you were you were saying what a Marxist would say. You just framed it differently, and
yeah.
it seems like the different framing was the cause of offense, not necessarily what you were ultimately saying.
Yeah, yeah. And so they had made this point was no, profit is always bad. And like I was saying, well, like let's not just do that because let's not make it a moral thing. And they didn't like being questioned on bringing morality into it because I'm always worried about, when you go into the realm of morality when you're discussing these things, you leave yourself open to being dismantled by, Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson wannabes out there. They're talking about, give them an argument by Ben Burgess. Like once you delve into other people's kind of specialty areas of argumentation, then like you're subject to kind of their argumentative methodologies of dismantling you or destroying you. And so, like, if you keep things as objective as possible, which is what Marx does, if you keep them as objective as possible without passing judgment too much, you can really, like, kind of scientifically analyze something and pick apart why it's problematic without getting emotional.
Hmm.
And so, like, this person was like, no, profit is always bad, like, kind of thing. And, like, you need to acknowledge that and just say it's bad, like, kind of thing. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And, like, this is part of kind of this kind of anti-corporatist um, narrative that's on the left. So like corporations are bad and corporations survive off profits. So like profits are bad, like kind of thing. Profits are always bad. And it's just like, well, if you look at, like you said, historical materialism or Marxist actual analysis of things, no, it's not bad in all cases. Like profit is the driving force for all of the wonders that we see in the modern world around us. And so, like, you have to respect what profit
Mm.
is, because profit can be dangerous in the wrong hands. And I used an analogy of like the profit drive and addiction. And like, it's not even an analogy, because like there is a lot of evidence and case studies out there how CEOs and heads of businesses and corporations are and do display addictive traits when they're going after their bonuses because they want to increase profits in that company. They
Mm.
they uh, they act just like addicts. And she was saying like, how dare you talk about basically addiction? You don't know what addiction is, and like how could you draw a correlation between profit drive and addiction? And like, I'm sorry, but that's exactly how CEOs and heads of businesses work. They act like addictive personalities when they're incessantly going after increased profits. And they will do that at the expense of people, which is exactly what addicts do as well. To meet their drive and their needs, they will do things often at the expense of others. So it's a solid analogy, and like, they just
Look,
didn't like it.
yeah, and look, I'm gonna bring her up again, Mariana Mazzucato, The
Hmm.
Value of Everything.
Yeah.
You just have to look at that book, like all the class. It's just pages on pages of you know the value being profit, the value being price, and how PE firms, big CEOs,
Hmm.
they will undercut probably the longevity of a business, just so long as they, sack half the staff and, the profits increase in the short term and they get those big bonuses. And
Yeah.
really all they're doing is passing on the liability to the next bozo that happens to be the next CEO after
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
The short term is basically uh, they undercut the longevity of the firm. And you know
Hmm.
PE firms are a classic case. They'll laden a business with debt to equity, like massive amounts of debt, and then they'll pull it off. They'll pull out and then give it to another firm, and then suddenly the business fails, and then somebody's the idiot holding the business that's suddenly gone down.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of short-term thinking in this.
Yeah, yeah, and it's destructive, and that's the point I was trying to make. And like, because it doesn't again meet the narrative, which is like profit itself is a bad thing for a lot of people on the left. It's just like, well, how dare you say it's not bad? Which is what I did in a recent short form piece of content, which is very throwaway content, but like they took exception to it. So yes, I challenge things, and I challenge things from a revolutionary perspective, because I don't want people to get caught in their own silos for too long. Like, get in your silo, dig deep into it, and absorb as much as you can from it, but then like go and look at another silo. But like, that's not what happens in the 21st century now in the social media age. People get trapped in their silos, and they will defend their ideas and their narratives to death, even against other people that are in solidarity with them, just because they are being challenged on something, and they don't
Mm.
like to have to hear alternative viewpoints. And people on the left like to think that they are more open-minded than people on the right, and they can handle that sort of stuff better. But what I found is like, everybody's the same. If their viewpoints are challenged, their immediate reaction is to defend, and aggressively. And then if they have the cognitive fortitude, they will try to understand. It is very difficult to try and empathize with someone who's just kind of shattered your worldviews. And so like, it's a hard type of content creator to be, for us, just like challenging people for the sake of challenging them. But like, there are some people out there, I think, that do really appreciate it. And I do really want to shout out to all of those people that, have followed me and subscribed to the stuff that I do, and like, just kind of support me generally. So thank you to all of them, and shout out to all of those people. So like, let's talk about your channel 4AS.
Yes.
What the hell do you do, and why do you do it?
Okay. Well, honestly, the best way to describe me is uh, basically my tagline. Well, my two taglines. One which is keep thinking and keep learning, and the other one being I read the books so you don't have to. So that pretty much sums up my channel. I guess I cover revolutionary ideas, but definitely I like tackling the bigger books, or at least ones that I just seem to find interesting, whether that's old school stuff that's been around for quite a long time, like for example, my most famous video essay is on neoliberalism, covering good old David Harvey's A Short History of Neoliberalism.
Hmm.
And you know, I live for those comments that I get, like in that neoliberalism one where somebody was like, "Oh my God, I never thought about it this way before, but before neoliberalism, it was the debtor. So it was the person that gave out the debt that took on the liability. But then after neoliberalism, it was the person that was given the money that takes on the responsibility and the liability. And that's what neoliberalism did. That's crazy. I'm just starting out law and learning about all this stuff. Thanks, man." I'm like, I love comments like that.
Yeah, 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 it
But
makes it all
but
worthwhile.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I guess my huge thing is reading. Like I'm pretty much almost constantly reading every night and every chance that I get at uh at work at like lunchtime kind of thing. Like almost to the point where like I'll be at work and like somebody will walk into the staff room and be like, "Oh, 4AS, what are you reading today?" And then I would be like, "Oh yeah, because like I've just started, the Peter Zahan
Oh,
book.
really?
I've just
Okay.
started it, so like
Yeah,
that is a monster book. But like,
yeah.
he's actually pretty good, and I agree with you. He yeah, the fact that he like doesn't care, like he'll swear left, right, and center. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, yeah, like I guess back to the point I was making with that before that, it's aside, like everyone's like, "Oh, well, what's the latest book that you're reading?" And then I'll explain the ideas, and they'll be like,
But
"Oh, that's interesting."
like
You'll
I
have
find your choice in content and your books then are more economically focused as opposed to philosophically focused. Is that fair to say? Like,
yes,
is that because of your accounting background?
yes, correct. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I've not had I've not formally uh, studied economics, but what I find interesting about economics is um, it's almost speaking of dialectics, it's almost the antithesis of accounting. Like accounting is basically everything that is happening currently and what is happening in the past. That's the whole reason why audits and financial statements and your profit and loss and your balance sheets, like that's all of that is about what's happening either today and in the past. But economics is everything that happens today and predicting like a fortune teller what's going to happen in the future, and using algorithms and using tables and models to predict exactly what it is. But what I find interesting, and maybe it's the fact that I at least understand the financy speak that economics use and that sort of thing, is well, everywhere has its propaganda, and yeah, I guess I do sometimes, do philosophical inclined things. Like, for example, like when I was in university, I actually did major in philosophy. So, but no, that is an accurate call to say that I'll definitely cover topics like, the neoliberalism one was definitely economic-y.
Mm.
I'll definitely cover ones with a much more economic focus one. Like the one that I'm working on right now is going over Adam Smith stuff, and that, the poster boy of neoliberals, the poster boy of your classical liberals. A lot of the propaganda that's surrounding that is not as what it seems.
Mm.
And
Mm.
yeah, I guess I'm kind of covering that now.
Yeah, and what does actually, I want to challenge you on something. Someone said something to me a long time ago, and I've actually never brought it up with you because I didn't want to offend you. But like one of your taglines is "I read the book so you don't have to," and like there was someone that I was talking to who is an avid reader, and they said, "Well, how bloody offensive! I want to read my own books. Thank you very much." How do you respond to that 4IS? To the person that loves to read and finds it offensive that you would assume that responsibility for them and just give them bite-sized versions of reading material in video essays.
Look, what I would say to that is, well, I guess I'm kind of saying that tagline uh, a bit tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
The way I see it is, I'm like an audible, because the thing is, like, sometimes what I do is, if I find a book that I'm interested in, I actually will listen to it on Audible first to see, like, oh, what is the broad structure, what is the broad concepts of what this book is, and then later I'll actually sit down and read the book and
Mm,
like
mm.
properly digest it, and then properly, because I'm a sucker for annotating. I absolutely love annotating stuff, and that's how I memorize things. So it's not until I'm in the flow state of annotating stuff and reading it properly and actually turning the pages that I actually digest it. So what I would say is, rather than, oh, you don't have to read this book yourself because I'll read it for you. No, I don't really see me doing that. I'm just the video essay form of your Audible that's showing you this cool book that I read recently and the cool ideas that I learned, and I'm sharing with you. And hey, you should check out this book yourself. And that's
Yeah.
the reason why every now and again I've done sources and their origins, and I'll actually directly, like, even though I do put the annotations of where I got it from, I will go back and directly say, like, hey, in this video essay, I got it from this book, I got it from this
Mm.
book, and it's actually quite cool. You should read this. And
Yeah.
like, I'll do like I do it as like a book recommendations thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I've not thought about it until you've just asked this question. But yeah, that's the metaphor I would go with. I'm the personification of an audible.
Yeah. Yeah. And for our listeners as well, what is the 4IS?
Yes, I was wondering when you were going to ask. So the four eyes, or the 4I system, is what I classify as integrity that leads to innovation. Innovation leads to inequity, and inequity leads to insanity. So I guess it's going along the I guess the productive forces and the kind of historical materialism that were going on before. And look, I'm sure I'm not the first person to see this, but I deliberately viewed it as that, like, what the 4AS is my envisage of the the cyclical nature of capitalism, and how, a business or capitalism starts an idea of with integrity and looking for that innovation, but it eventually leads to inequality, and then it eventually leads to insanity, where and then it starts again and again and again. It's just like my personal twist on the ideas of this kind of, Albert Einstein-esque, the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And I guess I've just tried to put it in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
And it's, what I call the four eye system, or the four eyes of capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that works on kind of the micro level as well as the macro level, right? It's also not just a critique of individual businesses or corporations, but it could also be used on the totality of capitalism, right?
Oh, yes, because I think that's probably where the insanity comes in. Because, like, one of my I always love it when David Harvey talks about totalities of systems and how, um, whenever, like Moneyballs, like the Moneyball movie situation where, there's a recession that's going on, and I guess everyone's kind of been feeding from the trough of money, kind of thing, and you have this totality situation where, the banks will say like, oh well, I did it because everybody was doing it, and the government will say like, oh well, I kind of shifted the blame to another group of people. It must have been because of them, and it's kind of this insane passing the buck scenario of something that could have been very easily avoided if somebody just kind of took responsibility.
Mm.
And it ends up, doing the fourth pillar of the 4AS, which is insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. Plenty of that to go around for us. Not going to argue with you there. Definitely not going to argue with you there. All right. I think that might be a good place to wrap it up today. But yeah, interesting topic. I think it's good to have a refresher like this. It's been a while.
Yeah, there was some other stuff that I wanted to cover, but you know what? I guess covering our whys was a great enough topic within
Yeah,
itself.
it is. It's huge.
Uh,
We could go on for a long time. But I really want to know because I've been staring at it a lot now, at least for the last 57 minutes, apparently. What the hell is, sorry, the segment is
yeah, what is
what's
that
that synthwave art?
synthwave art?
And what is that synthwave art? What are we looking at for
Okay,
AS?
like let me just look up the prompt for this one. Ah, arguing and debating online between the right and the left.
Right. And like, isn't it weird how they are like almost identical?
Yeah, I think that's what I find most fascinating. Which, yeah,
Like the
it's
only difference is one is on the right and one is on the left. Like that's pretty much it.
yes, and one is kind of pinkish, purplish headphones, and the other blue.
Yeah, but like you could bring that down to just maybe the different lighting on the different people. Because
But also, they're both looking at each other, but kind of not.
yes, yes, like the AI really likes doing that, putting people in close proximity to each other that like look really intimate, but like they're also at the same time completely unaware that there is another person there. That's a very kind of AI issue to deal with, like putting people into the context, but it's still looking like they completely are devoid from their context at the same time. It's a very kind of mechanistic or robotic kind of replication of real life situations, isn't it? Like they can make it look really good, but it just looks lifeless, doesn't it?
Yes, and
And like, wow, doesn't that speak volumes for it? But like, it's kind of homoerotic as well. So like, I'm just waiting for the left and the right to passionately embrace and just start macking on. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm waiting for right now. So like, maybe the AI is trying to tell us something deeper there, and like I would like to put that down to the yes, there's no war but a class war. And so like once the left and the right start macking on, then they will rise above their petty differences and identity politics and actually take on the larger enemy, which is their ruling classes.
Hey, and that's a good sentiment to finish things. And to close us out, remember everyone to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us out, I'll give it to you, Mr. A.
Thank you very much, 4IS. And yes, to reiterate, please, if you liked this episode, give it a like, share it with who you need to, and subscribe for more. And please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.